first speaker this morning joins us from U.S. Northern Command. He's our first ever keynoter from a combatant command, and he leads the CBRN Science and Technology Integration activities on behalf of U.S. Northern Command. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ed Doray.
Morning, everybody. So, I represent both NORAD and U.S. Northern Command, but for the purpose of this brief, I'm just going to focus on the U.S. Northern Command perspective of some of our missions and our nexus to the CBRN enterprise, moving into how do we relate to this community that's with us here today. So let me first, from a U.S. Northern Command, let me go over our missions that we have. And just to refresh everybody's memory, the AOR for U.S. Northern Command is here, includes Canada, Mexico, Bahamas, Turks, and Caicos. Hawaii is under PACOM from a responsibility standpoint. But within U.S. Northern Command, we have three missions: civil defense, homeland defense, and security cooperation. I just want to call out just a couple of our priorities from a U.S. NORTHCOM standpoint is to advance and sustain our capability to protect our homelands, as well as, this is a sort of a key one, improve upon the speed and response. Our AOR is our home. So with that, there's an additional emphasis, sensitivity, understanding, encouragement that we cannot be late to need. So if called upon, we've got to respond as fast as possible, because it's us, it's our families, it's our home that we're taking care of. On the bottom, the center of gravity is our trusted partners. Since this is our AOR and it's our home, you heard a little bit about it yesterday if you attended yesterday's discussion with respect to ties to HHS and Department of Homeland Security and so on and so forth. But within our command structure out in Colorado Springs, we have multiple liaisons, LNOs that span DHS, CBP, Coast Guard, TSA, FAA, Department of Transportation, FBI, DIA, JIADO, JPO, Chem Biodefense, obviously DITRA, HHS, and we extend out into coverage with the NGOs, American Red Cross, all the way out to the private sector, being Walmart, Target, Home Depot. From the standpoint, those are our partners from a Northern Command standpoint, and when we respond with all those partners. So it's not just DoD working independently, we're working across our team, and quite frankly, we can't execute our missions without those partners. So tying into the CBRN, I'll talk a little bit about the CBRN Enterprise Response Force. That falls under our civil support mission. So given a catastrophic event, and it can be all hazard, so it doesn't have to be necessarily specifically a CBRN event, but when that enterprise responds, there's a couple principal takeaways from this slide. And as I said earlier, it's about saving our families' lives, our communities' lives, as well as minimizing suffering. Right? So that's a significant impact that we carry with us in the development and refinement of these mission sets, as well as training and ultimately deployment. So to give you a sense of what this CBRN response enterprise looks like, it's spread from a state response, starting with the WMD CSTs, the civil support teams, all the way out to the Defense Suburban Response Force and the C2CRE A and Bs. And as you can see in the yellow or tan, that's the state response. So that's the response that the governors have at their disposal to respond to an event. And it's time phased, so with each additional force that gets laid in, you're bringing in more capacity, more capability. But as far as this response enterprise coming and deploying, it really focuses on a few things: search and extraction, decon, and emergency medical. So some of the discussions we had yesterday, and a number of the subsessions in the afternoon and obviously over the next few days, those tie into these issues, maybe more so decon, emergency medical. We have this response to execute these missions. But as the threat evolves, as the challenge evolves, we have to, from an S&T standpoint, from a COCOM standpoint, stay engaged with the community. And we do that through a number of methods, but you have to have a sense of, from a DoD standpoint, going from state response all the way through federal response, what we're bringing to the game. And a lot of this is from a very short timeline, as far as a number of hours from notification. These resources are moving out the door. It's 3 hours for the first one, 6 hours for the second one from notification that are heading to the response site. And to give you a sense, so of all these resources coming through, this is just a pictorial of where they're coming from, right? So they're intentionally distributed across the U.S. to address the speed to need. So as far as when that CBRN response enterprise moves, they're moving from a number of locations. It's both a good thing and a bad thing from the standpoint of, based on proximity, they can probably get there quicker, but on the flip side, you've got various unit components coming from distributed locations. So it's not like everything's at Fort Dix or Fort Hood or a single installation. These resources are coming through across the U.S. And they're not assigned to USNORTHCOM. They're allocated resources, especially from a federal standpoint. But they're trained and equipped, but they're equipped with the capabilities that we have today. Again, forcing the need to stay engaged with the community, to include the service labs, national labs, academia, so that we get a sense from an S&T standpoint supporting the command, what issues we need to be understanding of, anticipating those threats, and ultimately trying to get ahead of those threats. So if we encounter something from an S&T or from an S&T standpoint, we can start working that issue sooner rather than later, so that we can avoid potentially some of these surprises or challenges that we face. So from a U.S. Northern Command and working in the S&T arena, effectively this is sort of how we engage, but essentially we're trying to create strategies, capabilities, plans, projects to address the needs of the command as well as our subordinates and components that are under the command structure of U.S. Northern Command. And effectively, we're taking the gaps, issues that either the components or the subordinates or the staff and reaching out to the National Guard and what gaps they have, either if there's something they can't do or they need to do better, we will then take those challenges and try and get those addressed. And we do that through a number of means. The biggest one is outreach, right? So constant engagement with the national labs, constant engagement with the service labs, constant engagement with DTRA and JPO and others, academia, so that we get a sense of what we should be worried about, what's the state and the level of the capability, what's the state and the level of the research efforts, so that we can figure out how we can marshal our advocacy as a COCOM, because we don't have resources, right? So we have to rely on JPO, we've got to rely on DTRA, we've got to rely on the services, we've got to rely on the agencies to help us address our needs. So we're constantly working with the R&D community and the S&T community as well as those that have the resources to affect the outcome. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as I said, we're trying to outpace that threat so we don't get caught by surprise. The response enterprise is equipped and trained and ready to respond and in cases has responded. But we've got to keep that edge so that at the next event that happens, whether it's an all hazards event or a CBRN event, that those individuals, those forces are prepared to respond to help our communities and to help our families. So to give you a sense of just some high-level engagements that we have from a USNORTHCOM standpoint, these are just a few of them. So the first one being Constellation, which is a DTRA initiative to provide counter weapons of mass destruction situational awareness. This is a large undertaking by DTRA, and we're fully supportive of it to the extent that it's in our best interest from a COCOM standpoint to make sure Constellation is successful. So as bad as it sounds, we're doing everything we can to help them so that this capability comes to fruition. Case in point, we've asked DTRA to sit down with DISA, and because we understand that DISA has a lot of capabilities from enterprise services standpoint that we feel that Constellation could take advantage of, ultimately saving DTRA resources, but hopefully those resources can get recapitalized within the WMD arena to further the overall capability set. So we have a genuine interest in making sure that whatever program it is that's trying to address our needs, to help them make them as efficient and effective as possible, if we can do that from a 4-star standpoint. Whether it's looking at palming issues and making sure the R&D resources are there to the extent that we can advocate for those. So from a NORTHCOM standpoint, we don't have resources to fund these things, but we go out to the joint staff or the services or the agencies that says, hey, we need your help for this capability because it's important to us and it's important to our AOR. Moving on to the integrated early warning for biological incident rapid response hybrid is a DHS-DTRA collaboration. And again, from a NORTHCOM standpoint, our reliance on the engagement and partner of the interagency is critical. So whether it's DHS, HHS, we are often engaged in co-department or multiple department initiatives because at the end of the day, NORTHCOM only has limited authorities due to law and policy, so on and so forth. So there's only so much we can do, but it requires reliance and engagement on a regular basis, on a constant basis, engaging the interagency. So you'll see a lot of initiatives just over time where we're engaged with HHS and CDC and so on and so forth to make sure initiatives come together because we have a much broader view going beyond just North America and what we want to see. It also includes engagement with UCOM and AFRICOM and PACOM because the issues, take Ebola as an example, those issues come here, right? So from a NORTHCOM standpoint, we are really worried about everything. So a lot of the other COCOMs have their specific focus areas, whether it's Iran or Russia or North Korea or whatever the case may be. We worry about everything. Our previous COCOM commander informally called us the paranoid command because we worry about everything. So from the standpoint of whether it's pandemic influenza or infectious disease, we want to monitor globally those activities so that we're postured either to respond domestically or to respond or help the response internationally. Moving on to DSEA, Defense Security Enterprise Architecture. This is a big one from the standpoint of NORTHCOM is the operational manager for it, so we sort of lay in the operational requirements in coordination and collaboration with the services and the other COCOMs. But this is really connecting the multiple security domains, physical, cyber, weapons of mass destruction, CBRN, so on and so forth. Anything that has to do with security, whether it's the security of individuals or your physical security or whatever the case may be, we're trying to bring all these multiple silos to get the information to be able to crosstalk to each other. And we're actually making progress against this. Because usually when you get into projects, it's a scope issue, right? I only have so much funding, I can only do this piece of the puzzle. We've got to break that, as we talked about yesterday or heard about yesterday. Resources are, by and large, diminishing or not freely as available as they used to do. So we have to get out of these silos of excellence and make our data discoverable and shareable with the right execution, the right user rights, so on and so forth, to ensure privacy is addressed, so on and so forth. But this is a large undertaking, but it has ties back to Constellation. It has ties back to hybrid. From the standpoint of being able to share information not only amongst DoD and the multiple security domains, but as well as across the interagency so that we can see some of that horizon if there's a new pandemic influenza breaking, if there's new infectious diseases breaking. We've got to have information, that information going back to not wanting to be late to need, right? So we have a genuine interest in making sure these initiatives are successful because at the end of the day, it helps our mission set. With Mighty Saber dealing with nuclear technical forensics, and from a COCOM standpoint, DoD standpoint, and I think Dr. Wax is in the audience who leads the WMD community of interest, it's another way for us to engage the community writ large, because Dr. Wax has the challenge of dealing with this entire community and influencing the investments and the capabilities that come out of the larger community, the DoD community, on what they're doing to address the WMD challenges that we face. So it's a constant challenge of engaging these opportunities, trying to influence them, and advocating that they come to fruition, and it's a constant engagement. Just to touch base a little bit on Constellation, I know it was mentioned yesterday, but essentially it's about this obtain, analyze, and fuse global information. Again, trying to anticipate what the needs are, getting ahead of the threat, and make sure that we understand the challenges associated with if we are ready for it, or if we're not ready for it, how we're going to deal with it. But the sooner we can get a heads up, an indication and warning, the better off we're going to be. Engaging DHS and looking at this biological incident rapid response, you know, from a NORTHCOM standpoint, us being the global synchronizer for pandemic influenza and infectious diseases, you know, we look at our comm plan, what the comm plan says NORTHCOM's got to do to support this mission set, and then go and say, well, okay, can we do all this stuff? And if we can't, or if we need to get better, what in that plan tells us we've got to do, and then reaching back out to the S&T or the R&D community to make sure those issues get addressed. Again, DCIA, this is the automated sharing of information, so, right? So as new systems come online, understanding you always have scope and resource challenges, but to make sure that information could be discoverable and could be shareable. Understanding rule sets would have to be in place to enable that. But as new systems come online, got to make sure that information has a standard-based approach so that it can be discoverable and searchable, and ultimately can be served up. So although quick, from a CBRN, a chem biodefense standpoint, we've got a lot of equity in this game. If for no other reason, again, this is our home. And as the mayor doesn't work for the governor, and the governor doesn't work for the president, so we have all these sovereign states, if you will, which obviously we respect. So from a DoD standpoint, the response enterprise doesn't come into play unless the mayor asks for it, unless the governor asks for it, unless FEMA asks for it. That's when we come into play. But when we get that call, we do not want to be late to need. So we've got to understand the environment, got to understand the needs of the first responders, got to understand the needs of the states and what they can share, and as was mentioned yesterday, what the NGO community provides, what American Red Cross provides, what are the various other VOADs that they provide. We have to include and understand their capabilities and capacities to respond, because the reality is they're going to be responding with us. So if we don't incorporate what their capability and capacities are, it doesn't help the overall system.